Subscribers to this channel who also follow my blog are probably aware now that we have started our Mythic Britain campaign, just called Summer Blood and Winter Snow. And the way the campaign is being structured is that I intend to run the campaign which is presented in Mythic Britain, but it will be heavily supplemented by other material. So we have run a few sessions to establish who the characters are first and develop a little familiarity with some of the regional NPCs, like their local king and the local druids of note and some of the local cult members and that sort of thing, and to play long enough to have the character, the inner character of the character begin to manifest. So we know who they are before we launch into the Arthurian themed campaign which makes up Mythic Britain. It's been kind of interesting so far, and what this is a recap of that first group of stories. So we've met 3 times online. We have 2 active characters and 1 character that hasn't had a chance to play yet due to life stuff. So our 2 characters are Hylan ap Aidan and Von ap Edgard. And Von ap Edgard is our kind of novice druid who is a little overweight and not maybe as charismatic as those under whom he is training. They are living in the kingdom of Cornovia, and this is in central Britain. And well, this is a hotbed of religious activity. They live near where the King Lend has his hall, and recently they've gotten tied up in some very important and curious events. And in the first session, Von ap Edgard was told he must go out into the woods and, well, do something, anything, because the entire area has been gripped in a near famine. There have been raiding parties from an unknown place that have been stealing cattle, and the king can't find out who they are, and this sort of thing. So Von, not being one for the wilderness very much, goes to his childhood friend Hylan ap Aidan, who is, if anything else, he is a hunter and warrior. And the 2 of them go out in the woods to do what they're asked: find food, or find sign of raiders, or make contact with the spirits and be able to glean some kind of blessing or some understanding of the perils, the straits that the community has fallen to. Well, they travel, and Von sliding into and out of trances, and well, they stumble across a trail, just a small trail as of a squirrel scampering across the winter snows. And lacking anything better to do, they follow it. They almost feel its significance, although Hylan is about as immune to the idea of the supernatural world as it's possible to be. Although he's grown up in and around the druids, or maybe because he's grown up in and around the druids, he doesn't really believe much of what they say. It has a spirit or a basis in spirituality. While he is a good Celt, and he may believe that there is a transition point between this world and the next, that the ancestors can follow along and observe, and the gods are present. When a druid tells him something is supernatural, so far he has not believed it. He's not given into a superstition. Superstition is a major part of the Mythic Britain campaign. Interpreting signs and omens is a part of the way the game envisions the pagan lifestyle. Being aware of and sensitive to portents or the communications of the natural world and the world just beyond ours. So this trail of squirrel tracks took on some significance to Von, And, Highland was open-minded about it. And it led them to a tree, and in the tree there was a hollow, and in the hollow they found a silver brooch in the local Celtic style, actual silver of thorn bushes and running wolves in the background behind the thorns. And how did it get here? Why here? And where was the squirrel? As Highland was descending from the tree with the brooch, they heard the snuffling and the rustling of a boar. They knew they wouldn't be able to ever live it down if they didn't try to at least track the boar, so maybe a hunting party could come out and take care of it. But before they knew it, they were actually attacked by the boar, and the boar was white, and its head and its forelegs were splashed with blood as if it had killed before, or if it was marked from birth. And just the sight of the boar sent Vaughan into a trance state, and he was swept up in a vision about their kingdom, about their region, how it was beset by enemies from within and without, and how maybe hope lay to the south. But while he's caught up in this trance, while he's trying to draw his dagger and lend aid, his hunter companion Highland has to deal with this boar all by himself, and the boar's deadly charge. He's wounded, and he's a good spearsman, and he has his shield with him, but this boar is huge and fierce, and his leg is injured, he's driven to the ground, the boar comes around for another pass, and he manages to impale the boar in the upper shoulder, and the huge boar is slowed and made awkward by having this spear penetrating it. And it stumbles through the undergrowth, and Vaughan kind of comes to his senses and with his dagger tries to lend aid, but the boar's hide is so tough and it's so powerful it deflects the blow and kind of tosses him to the side, and the two men are injured, and they bring themselves together to kind of threaten the boar. Maybe it won't charge, but of course, filled with bloodlust, it does, and they manage to bring it down without too many further injuries. But Highland is bleeding out and definitely needs some medical attention. Fortunately, Vaughan is a skilled healer. His time among the Druids, he has learned many things. So he manages to stop the bleeding and prevent too much scarring. In Mythic Britain, we don't have access to much magic, so our former RuneQuest campaign, it was always possible to stabilize wounds with some folk magic and some loving attention from first aid, but here the threats were far more significant. So Highland's injury and Vaughan's timely action with medicine was critical. The two men injured with this massive boar and their hungry community far, far away, they have a long way to go back to civilization, carrying their prize. They know once they get back, they will be rewarded by the king and receive much praise from the rest of the community. So they are strongly motivated. Their passion of loyalty to their king spurs them on, keeps them going as they get further and further in the grip of fatigue and suffering. That first session ended with the two of them making it back to the community. Vaughan's, kept bolstered by the idea of the fine food that they would be having later, and Highland by his loyalty to the king. But both men are in rough shape by the time they are found, and struggling through the underbrush. And that's where that first session ended, with them making it safely back to the community, knowing that they would receive an award and knowing that they'd be looked after that night by the Druids, who could tell that there was something about Vaughan that had changed, that he had been caught up in the grip of a very powerful and potent vision. The next morning, the next session, we dealt a little bit with community life, and both men had to take care of their daily chores, their contributions, but they also were being pestered by everyone in the community to tell the story, and they knew that they shouldn't. They should save the story until the feast. There would be a feast that night, and the boar would be prepared for everyone. The meat would be shared with everyone, and the story should be saved as a prize and as a reward to make the king's hospitality far grander. But of course, there are many persuasions among the people in the community, and warm food and a full glass of ale, especially in this time of famine and privation, definitely pried some details loose from Highland, and all the community is abuzz because Highland, staggering on his feet, when they made it back to the community the night before, he had told the druids that the reward he wanted was the pelt of the boar, this white and blood red pelt. And of course, such a prize would be reserved for the very highest, the most noble, certainly for the king. One thing that was very much on the minds of both men was that as they considered the splash of red in the white pelt, was that if it reminded them of anything, it reminded them of the shape of their home region, of Cornovia. And how could such a thing be? Is it just coincidence, or is it actually a mark, a warning, an omen of some kind? Vaughn very much thinks it's an omen. Highland, well, he just likes the pelt. So, we meet some members of the community. Vaughn is tasked with preparing for some very highly placed cult members in the cult of Sabrina, who venerate the wetlands and the rivers of the region, and they will be passing through, and they will be joining the feast. He has to take care of the community well, and he must give sacrifices at the local river. And so he's busy pretty much all day, but he does manage to stop in and be able to benefit from the whining and dining of Highland, who all the local warriors and whatnot are trying to pry these details about his battle with the boar from him. And they not only have some important conversations with Calder, the well-placed druid who has been training Vaughn, but they have meetings with their old warrior mentor who would have trained them as boys in how to use the spear and how to join the shield wall. And while Vaughn is not a warrior by any stretch of the imagination, he can still remember some of those drills with pain and clarity. But they acquit themselves socially quite well. They don't reveal too many secrets that really should only be revealed in front of the king the first time. And they survive that day and make it to the feast. The feast is an amazing event. There's musicians and feats of strength and boasting and tale telling. And of course, Highland is called to tell the tale. And backed up, the two of them, Vaughn and Highland, weave this tale. And in the midst of the tale, Vaughn is caught up in the grip of prophecy again, as the pelt, which has now been skinned from the boar, is brought almost like a banner between two poles and propped up behind the king, and everyone can clearly see the splash of blood across the front of it, and Vaughn is swept up with his prophecy again and again, directly prophesying before the king. He talks about threats internal to the community and external, and the ashes of past war reigniting into future war, and perhaps a sign of hope, a bright beacon of hope to the south. And those who are politically adept can maybe glean a sign that, to the south is Dumnonia, and there is the young Arthur who has been riding about, making a name for himself and calling for other chieftains to band with him and talk about uniting against the Saxons. Maybe this boar is a sign from beyond their borders. Who can say? Askrig, the chief druid of the area, and Calder, his right-hand man, they ally with Vaughn, and they spin this into an opportunity to have the king act, and act decisively. And so a raiding party is called, or more appropriately, a scouting party. And as this particular session closed, there was a drawing of which members of the community would be involved in this scouting party. And of course, Highland and Vaughn are held up as its leaders, and they will find out who has been raiding, who has been stealing cattle, who has been stealing grain, who has been making the famine worse. Seek them out and punish them if possible, or come back and raise the army to go and punish them properly. And that session ends with Highland and the king face to face, the king giving him an armband to show the regard that the king has for him, and Highland catching him out in a promise and saying, if I do this thing for you and am successful, I want the pelt, and the king, being trapped politically, having to agree that yes, that would be a suitable reward. And so that session ends with political peril or political gain for Vaughn and his young hunter companion. The next session, the session that we've just played, opened with the fires burning low and some people giving in to their drunkenness and going to sleep on the floor and on the tables, and Askrig goading the situation to once again cement the power of the Druids over this. To build the king up was his primary goal, but to build the king up in conjunction with him is more important. And so he pushes Vaughn once again into the limelight and commands him to prophesy in which direction should they travel. Where are the spirits telling him that these raiders have been striking from? And Vaughn has no idea and is no longer consumed by the close proximity of the spirit world that has been with him over this last 2 days. But he does what he is asked to do by his mentor and, his master, let's say, and prophesies. And very astutely, too. He brings Highland out as a sort of chosen one, the one who's been marked by the spirits to bring about a tide of change. And so, he says, through the skill of Highland, we will be led to the path, and we have every confidence that we will be able to find those who are responsible for this attack on us. And the crowd loves it, and revelry continues, and Highland is raised up on shoulders and paraded around, and all the while he's giving praise to the king. And jealousy is decreased, and the bounty of the king is seen as being the framing foundation of the scene. So all is well. The next morning, the chosen 8 will become 9 with Vaughn. The 9 of them will be sent out. So they meet together and they agree on a time where they will come together the next day and in which direction they will head. And they go back to make their preparations. And they find that the community has banded together around them, and small gifts of small bits of food have been provided for them, and their gear, their winter gear, has been addressed and oiled and tightened and prepared, cleaned, so that their journey on foot through the snows will be as comfortable and safe as possible. They travel for several days and are lucky to find tracks and spoor, lucky, and as a result of Highland's skill and the stirrings within Vaughn of a sense of which direction to travel. But that second morning out on the trail, they're beset upon by a cold, icy rain. Can't decide if it wants to be ice or rain, and there's an ice fog, and all around them the forest is full of the cawing of crows, and the men begin to get nervous. But Vaughn reminds them of the Morgan. Vaughn reminds them that they are on the quest of vengeance, rightful vengeance, and that any such signs are signs that the spirits are with them. Soon their moods lift, and although the going is hard and the fatigue builds, and 1 night, then 2 nights, then 3 nights journey with no real rest and no respite from the growing fatigue, they find their objective. Highland creeps forward on his own, scouting things out, and he sees a group of 6 warriors and their captured cattle, not just their cattle, but the cattle of other holdings as well. And they're butchering the cattle and preparing it for, preserving it for the rest of the winter against the famine. And what are they going to do? They just barely outnumber this force, and there could be a lot of casualties, but they're under compunction by the king. They're compelled by the king. They must do this thing. And in order to survive these 3 harsh days, Highland has gotten them all worked up. Their loyalty to the king, their passion, dedication is at a fever pitch, and they're willing to do anything to make sure that they can complete this quest and come back and get the glory that's due them. Vaughn's not willing to let them sacrifice themselves for this, and he goes out on his own, approaches them on his own, and calls them on their lack of loyalty, cites that they're bringing dishonor and curses upon their households, and with a swelling chorus of crows all around him, and a critical roll on superstition by these raiders, he makes them see the errors of their ways, and they strip down the camp, and they pack up the cattle, and they agree to head back to ask for forgiveness from King Lend, and to recommit themselves, to re-pledge their loyalty to him and serve as his warriors. And they make the long struggle back, but it's not easy. The snow keeps falling, getting deeper. The cattle don't want to travel. They have difficulty fording rivers. Their camps are alternating good and bad. The fatigue is growing. Everything's getting harder, and they know that any day now that they might be pursued by the immediate chieftain, their immediate liege lord of the raiders. And he is a hard and vengeful man, and he's the chieftain sitting in Caer Frith, and he may not see eye to eye with King Lend on everything. They may actually have to fight to protect their reclaimed goods. They keep working their way closer and closer back to their homeland, but the larger group, there are now 12 of them, and all the cattle and the worsening weather, their rate is slowed, and they're caught by men on horseback, the night before they are to make it back to their home community. What are they going to do? Well, once again, Vaughn singles himself out, and he cuts one of the cows from the herd, and he's going to make a sacrifice of it, as if he's going to curse, their pursuers with the blood of their stolen goods. But he's not as persuasive this time, and their pursuers are hard-bitten warriors who know how they are caught between a rock and a hard place, between one vow of loyalty and another. And Highland must step forward and begin speaking of true loyalty, and together with the threat of curse and with the bonds of loyalty brought out and laid bare, it becomes a negotiation. And both sides must realize that there has been thieving going on both sides, raise tributes, and as the famine spreads across Cornovia, that the liege lords have been calling for more and more tribute. Who stole from whom first is raised. So Vaughn sees fit to release some of the cows to the raiders, and Highland backs it up with some of the preserved meat, and they divide what has been regained. And the raiders return with something to show and some things to think about what kind of men these are who serve King Lend with such fealty. And our crew can return back to their king, having fulfilled his wishes. So we ended the third session with our exhausted band riding into their hometown with all of this to show, and the king coming forward and honoring his promise, providing Highland with the pelt, and recognizing that although he is king, many of the small chieftains in the region have gotten a tighter hold on the loyalty of the people than maybe he has now, and so he recognizes that he must make a winter tour from chieftain to chieftain, showing them their king face to face and what manner of man he is. And that's how we closed out the session, as winter drops its heavy blanket over the region. Playing in Mythic Britain has had a really curious effect on me as we play through. We've just finished off over a year of playing in a homegrown fantasy world, which had a very distinct atmosphere, and it was a collaborative atmosphere as well. Like the players were responsible for creating their home cultures and homelands, but in this we are evoking the sort of feel of an ancient Arthur, of a very mysterious time, and that feel, and being able to bring that feel out through passion rolls, through the use of superstition as it's described in Mythic Britain and as it's encoded in the mechanics of Mythic Britain, has brought about some interesting situations and choices. And this young druid has been able to have lasting effects, lifelong effects on the people around him, about the way they see the world, the way that they see their own actions. And this young warrior has been able to inspire others to incredible feats by not wanting to disappoint their king. This is a time when oaths meant something more than just a promise. And you can almost feel it, you can almost taste it. I really can't wait until the next session. We're going to have to wait for a while, as one of our members is going on a long vacation to a foreign land, and of course, the holidays are coming, and all of the things that brings. But when we get into the actual campaign scenarios printed in Mythic Britain, I'm wondering how meeting some of these iconic characters, meeting a young Arthur, perhaps meeting those in his warband around him, names that we've grown up with as real people in the real world. What is it going to be like, and how will the interactions with these characters change the course of the lives of these young characters that we have created? What will become of Highland ap Aidan, and what will become of the young druid Von ap Edgard? What will happen when they cross the paths with the ancient and venerated druid Merlin? It's a whole world of adventure waiting for us. A very different feeling adventure in a very mythical world.